Hello, and welcome to today's presentation on public charge. My name is Sarah Lacani, and I'm an attorney with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center in San Francisco. The goal of today's presentation is to share accurate information about public charge to empower immigrants in California to access public benefits they are eligible for without fear of negative immigration consequences. I'll talk about what public charge is and who it applies to. I'll also talk about how the public charge test works. Lastly, I'll be talking about COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic, and how it has affected the immigrant community, as well as public charge concerns stemming from COVID-19 related assistance funds. There has been a lot of confusion around public charge over the past couple of years. And in February of this year, the Trump administration implemented 2 new public charge policies. Now, with COVID-19, it's never been a more important time to talk about what supportive services immigrants can access and how accessing services may or may not impact immigration legal opportunities in the United States. The first part of this presentation will address what public charge is and who it applies to. So let's get started. What is public charge? There has been a lot of intimidating information about immigration circulating in the community over the past few years, and news about public charge rules is one of the reasons many immigrants are feeling anxious right now. But what exactly is public charge? There are many myths circulating in the community. Some people are worried they will be deported if they or their children use government-subsidized healthcare because the government will think they are a public charge. Others are worried that public charge means their family isn't eligible for any benefits, for example. Public charge actually isn't either of these things, or any of the things suggested by the questions on the slide. Public charge is a test in immigration law that only applies to 2 types of cases. If you are applying for a visa to enter the United States, and if you are applying for permanent residence, which is also called a green card, through a family member. The public charge test is part of the application process for these legal opportunities. The test evaluates if someone applying for a green card or for a visa to enter the U.S. seems likely to depend on public benefits programs in the future. If immigration officials decide that the applicant is likely to become a public charge because they seem likely to depend on public benefits in the future, they can deny the person's green card or visa application. Because the public charge test only applies to 2 kinds of cases, many immigrants are not subject to public charge. In other words, there are many other ways that a person can come to the United States or have a lawful immigration status that don't involve a public charge test. For example, a person who comes to the United States as a refugee or a person who's already in the United States and applies for asylum doesn't have a public charge test. U visa applicants, T visa applicants, young people who are applying for special immigrant juvenile status, and VAWA self-petitioners also don't have a public charge test. Also, if you apply for your green card through one of those statuses I just mentioned, you don't have a public charge test either. People who are applying to renew DACA or who are applying for TPS also don't have a public charge test. And people who are applying for naturalization to become a U.S. citizen don't have to undergo a public charge test. Most permanent residents also don't have to worry about public charge unless they travel outside of the U.S. for more than 180 days on one single trip. So again, all of these people can access public benefits they're eligible for and do not have to worry about it affecting their immigration status. This is because they don't have a public charge test in their future. The second part of this presentation will address how the public charge test works. As I explained earlier, many immigrants are not subject to public charge, so they won't have a public charge test in their future. But what if you will face a public charge evaluation because you're applying for a green card through a family member or for a visa to enter the country? This is a snapshot of the public charge test. As a reminder, immigration officials use the public charge test to see if an immigrant is likely to use certain government services in the future. The officers look at all of an immigrant's circumstances to try to predict this, not just prior use of public programs. As you can see on the slide, officers consider all sorts of factors in a person's case, and things like having a good income, having a job, being healthy, or having a high school diploma will help you in the public charge test. As I mentioned earlier, the Trump administration implemented 2 new public charge policies in February of this year. One of the changes was adding consideration of additional public benefits programs for public charge purposes. This means that officers are now considering all of the programs listed here when they're trying to predict whether the intending immigrant in front of them is likely to use government services in the future. The programs in red are the newly added programs. The programs in blue were always considered in public charge evaluations. So here in California then, one of the factors immigration officers will try to predict in the public charge test they're administering is whether a person is likely to use cash assistance programs, full scope Medi-Cal, CalFresh, and or a federal housing program in the future. But again, this prediction is based on all sorts of aspects of a person's present situation, like their age, their health, and their income, not just on whether they've ever used one of these programs in the past. Also note that several kinds of Medi-Cal use specifically do not count under the new public charge policies. These include emergency Medi-Cal services, school-based services for children, Medi-Cal use by immigrant children under 26 years of age, and Medi-Cal use by pregnant women and up to 60 days after a pregnancy. While the new list of programs that count for public charge has grown, the reality is that most people who will face a public charge test aren't even eligible for the programs that the public charge test considers. Or if a person is participating in one of these programs, it's likely that that person won't have a public charge test in their future. For example, if you are receiving CalFresh or Medi-Cal, it's probably because you have an immigration status, like a U visa, that is not subject to public charge. For reference, I talked about the groups of immigrants who aren't subject to public charge a few slides ago. Also, the only public benefits that are considered in a public charge test are those listed on slide 8. That means that there are many public programs that aren't included in the public charge test whatsoever. All of the services listed here and many more not listed will not impact a person if they apply for an immigration benefit that includes a public charge test. Some important programs that do not count for public charge purposes are CHIP, WIC, Emergency and Disaster Relief, and Public Health Services. A question we hear a lot at the ILRC has to do with family members who use benefits and how that might impact an applicant's case, even if the applicant isn't using benefits. It's important to know that benefits received by your family members are not part of your public charge analysis and will not directly harm your case. However, if the family member who is using benefits is also the family member who is petitioning for you to get a green card, immigration officers can consider that family member's use of benefits in their assessment of the family member's ability to support you financially when they come to the United States. This is an application requirement. Also, if someone in your family is eligible for a benefit that counts for public charge purposes, but you receive the benefit on behalf of that family member, that will not affect you if you apply for an immigration benefit that includes a public charge test. For example, if your U.S. citizen child is eligible for CalFresh, but you physically receive the benefit for your child because you are her parent, that won't be considered in your public charge test. A key date to know regarding the new public charge policies is February 24th, 2020. That's the date the Trump administration's changes to public charge took effect. However, there are some important nuances to the February 24th date. First, use of any of the newly added benefits, those ones noted in red on slide 8, use of any of those benefits before February 24th does not count in public charge assessments under the new policies. Also, there's an implementation distinction to keep in mind if your case will be decided by USCIS here in the United States versus at a consular office or embassy abroad. If your case was pending with USCIS before February 24th, USCIS will decide it under the old public charge policies, which were much more forgiving. However, if your case will be decided at a U.S. consulate or embassy, your case will be evaluated under the new public charge policies if you have an interview on or after February 24th, even if your case was pending at the office before that date. Here are some takeaway points from our discussion. First, public charge does not apply to everyone. Many people, such as U.S. citizens, permanent residents applying to naturalize, asylees and refugees, and U visa holders, for example, don't have a public charge test. Second, public charge only applies to two types of immigration applications: applications for permanent residence through a family member, and applications for a visa to enter the United States. Third, public charge does not affect your eligibility for public benefits programs. You can continue to apply for available services for which you are eligible. Fourth, the services that your family members receive will not harm your application if you have a public charge test. Lastly, it's important to consult an immigration expert if you have questions about your personal situation, especially before you cancel any public benefits. We want to emphasize that if public charge is confusing to you, you are not alone. The new public charge policies out of the Trump administration are meant to be confusing and to intimidate immigrants from accessing public programs they are eligible for and that they need to care for themselves and their families. We hope that this presentation made things a little bit clearer, and we encourage you to continue learning about public charge and to seek out immigration lawyers and accredited representatives to answer your questions. At the ILRC, we have created some resources on public charge that you might like to review to increase your knowledge of public charge. Links to those are on the slide. If you'd like to talk with a legal services provider in California who understands public charge, take a look at the list of public charge providers on the California Department of Social Services website. You can search for providers nationwide by zip code on the Immigration Advocates website listed on the slide. The third part of this presentation will address the current COVID-19 public health crisis and how it relates to public charge. Let's talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and its connection to immigrants and public charge. As you know, we're in the middle of a worldwide public health crisis as the deadly coronavirus continues to wreak havoc. The virus hit the United States in January of this year, just a month before the Trump administration's new public charge policies went into effect. The president declared a national emergency on March 13th, and states and counties across the country began implementing shelter-in-place policies to limit the spread of the virus. There have been significant economic consequences stemming from the virus, including massive job loss. As difficult as the pandemic and economic crisis has been for many in the United States, low-income immigrants are being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. For instance, immigrants are playing critical roles in the pandemic response as essential workers, as farm workers and medical professionals, for example. But so far, immigrants have been mostly excluded from the federal relief packages passed by Congress. At the same time, the new public charge policies, which are punitive and confusing, have deterred many immigrants and their family members from accessing medical care, health coverage, nutrition assistance, and other aid. We want to urge community members to access the care and services they need during this trying time. USCIS has announced that testing, treatment, and preventative care for COVID-19 will not be considered as part of the public charge evaluation. These services will have no negative impact, even if provided or paid for by one or more public benefits included in the rule, like regular full-scope Medi-Cal. USCIS has also said that people who use public benefits because of COVID-19 related factors, like quarantine or employer shutdown, may submit a letter of explanation to USCIS, and officers will take that into consideration in their public charge assessments. We aren't sure exactly what it means that USCIS will take into consideration that someone used public benefits like food stamps due to COVID-19, but we hope it means that USCIS will not look unfavorably upon it, even though such benefit use will be evaluated. It's important to remember, too, that emergency Medi-Cal is exempt from public charge, meaning that if you lack health insurance and seek out COVID-19 care in an emergency room, for example, that won't count towards public charge. Separate from U.S. immigration agencies' announcements around COVID-19, over the past few months, we've seen Congress take some important steps to help people who are struggling economically as a result of job loss or other financial hardship related to the coronavirus pandemic. However, the federal COVID-19 relief packages only provide support to those with a valid Social Security number. This includes some members of the immigrant community, but not all. Some of the forms of support provided by the existing federal relief packages include financial aid to taxpayers who qualify based on their income level, as well as more robust unemployment compensation to eligible workers. Importantly, neither of these forms of assistance count for public charge purposes if the recipient will have a public charge test. This is because tax credits and unemployment aid are public benefits that are specifically excluded from the public charge test. As I just explained, unfortunately, the federal COVID-19 relief programs enacted so far exclude many immigrants from key forms of assistance, including the financial assistance to taxpayers. Fortunately, we've seen states and localities across the country stepping up to fill some of these gaps by designing their own emergency relief funds. This includes California, which is providing funds through the Disaster Relief Assistance for Immigrants project. I'll talk about the details of this program in a moment, but I'd like to first discuss public charge concerns related to accessing these local emergency relief funds, including California's program, but other programs too. We're getting questions about the public charge risks of accessing these programs. The main question is whether USCIS would consider these funds, which offer cash aid, to be cash assistance for income maintenance, which would count in a public charge test, or if USCIS would consider these emergency funds to be disaster relief, which would not count in a public charge test. Unfortunately, USCIS hasn't provided any guidance during COVID-19 on this issue specifically, but we have strong arguments that these emergency funds are disaster relief, which wouldn't count against someone for public charge purposes. For example, there is reassuring language in the new DHS public charge rule that we can rely on, stating that the agency won't consider all forms of cash aid as cash assistance for income maintenance, including federal, state, and local disaster relief. Remember here too, that unless a person is actively applying for a green card through a family member or for permission to enter the country, they will not even face a public charge evaluation. So their focus right now should be on taking care of themselves and their families during this extremely difficult time. They should access the assistance available to them if they need it. One of the great local emergency relief funds that has been created during COVID-19 is the Disaster Relief Assistance for Immigrants project in California. Through this program, the state of California is providing one-time cash assistance directly to undocumented Californians who are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but are excluded from federal relief and ineligible for most state safety net programs. To be eligible for this disaster relief assistance, a person must be able to show that they are an undocumented adult, that they are not eligible for federal COVID-19 related assistance, like the tax credits or pandemic unemployment benefits, and have experienced a hardship as a result of COVID-19. Successful applicants will receive $500 for a maximum of $1,000 per household. The disaster relief assistance is being administered and delivered through 12 nonprofit organizations located in various regions of California. And these nonprofit organizations began providing assistance to applicants on May 18, 2020. People are only allowed to receive the funding assistance from nonprofit organizations assigned to their county or region. Assistance is being provided on a first-come, first-served basis, and the state anticipates that the funding will run out before the program ends on June 30th, 2020. We encourage you to learn more about this program if you think you might qualify, and to reach out to the nonprofit organization assigned to your county or region. Information can be found at the website listed on the slide. As with other state and local COVID-19 relief funds, there should not be any negative public charge implications of using these funds. Another important source of assistance for immigrant families that we want you to be aware of is pandemic EBT. In California, families with children who are eligible for free or reduced priced meals at schools that have closed due to the coronavirus can receive a preloaded EBT card in the mail for every eligible child in an amount of the value of the school meals, depending on the time their schools will be closed, up to a maximum of $365 per child. These EBT cards can be used everywhere that CalFresh EBT is used to buy food. How do you access pandemic EBT? Families with children who receive CalFresh, Medi-Cal, or foster care benefits do not need to apply and should have already received their pandemic EBT cards in the mail. Families with children who are eligible for free or reduced price meals but who have not yet received their pandemic EBT cards in the mail should apply online now before June 30th at the website listed on the slide. We want to assure you that use of pandemic EBT does not count in any public charge test you might have. This is because it is a form of disaster relief. To close, I want to leave you with a few extra resources that may be of help during this time. Separate from California's Disaster Relief Assistance for Immigrants project, there are several organizations in California that are providing cash aid to immigrant communities facing financial hardship right now. You can find out more information about these organizations and how to apply for aid at the website listed at the top of the slide. Next, if you are struggling to feed yourself or your family, remember that there may be a food bank near you where you can obtain food for free. If you visit the website on the slide, you can enter your zip code and see if there is a food bank nearby. Also, there are no public charge issues associated with getting food from a food bank. Lastly, if you need to get tested or treated for coronavirus or any other ailment, know that you can always seek care at a community health center near you. If you go to the website on the slide, you can find the nearest community health centers to you by entering your address or zip code. Thank you for joining me today, and take care.